poetry started, I suppose, when I was 8, and probably like most kids, it was a school assignment I had to do, but I immediately loved it and ever since wrote poetry to, you know, greater or lesser capacities, I suppose. And so it's just been this lifelong thing for me, whereas fiction, at some point, I realized I was terrified of writing it, probably in my early 20s. I had never really attempted to write it much. And I thought, well, that's not really great. I mean, you shouldn't just not write something because you're afraid of the genre or the form. So I decided to try and start writing. And I used this method that I weirdly got from reading Nietzsche, of all people, where I would just try to write a one-page story. And, you know, if it wasn't exactly one page, that was fine. But I tried to at least write a one-page story and then really gradually build to longer and longer stories, which has been an excruciatingly long process, I have to say, to work up to like a full-length story. But yeah, now I write short fiction, and as I'm getting into my thesis, I've also been attempting this novel, so we'll see how that goes.
What do you find most useful from your poetry skill set that you've been transferring to fiction?
I think the main thing is this perhaps an over-attentiveness to language, really, where in a poem, you're so sensitive to the fact that each word must be not perfect, I'll say, but must have its place and must have its use. And you don't have extraneous words generally in poetry, or words that don't quite fit. And I do find one of my qualms with fiction I don't like tends to be that it seems a little bit imprecise in its language, or it's a little bit, you know, just too casual with language. It's too easy to slip, I think, into cliche when you're writing fiction in a way that's harder in poetry. And so I guess that sensitivity or attentiveness to the perfection of each individual word is both helpful for writing fiction and extremely trying.
You seem to have a collaborative approach to your output in terms of a cooperative chapbook and a writing collaborative made with Marc La Liberté. How does that approach work? Do you each write a separate work and edit each other, or like songwriters combine resources and lines and forms together?
Yeah, I've done collaborative writing in various contexts before, but the only really sustained effort is this group of two of us, myself and Marc La Liberté, called MADE. And we've used actually a few approaches. I mean, we kind of try to do different things depending on the project we're working on. The way we started out was we would actually sort of get like a document. We were working in the same space, and one of us would write a line or two, and then the other would have to write the next line or two, and just build a poem. And then we would stop basically when neither of us had anything more to say in that vein. And then we would go back together and sort of edit by consensus. If there were things we both thought weren't working, we would change them. And that's, I would say, probably been our predominant mode. And so it just seemed so arbitrary and unfair that we would cut off people at 35 and say, well, you no longer get support as an emerging writer. You're on your own. Good luck. Especially because depending on our life circumstance, if we come from difficult, marginalized, whatever oppressed life circumstances, it's going to be even harder to like emerge as a young person because we don't have the supports in place. And so the age cap just seemed discriminatory to me. And I've thought about this for years. And this year I was like, well, you know what? I'm going to write them an email. And so I did. I wrote them an email, and they wrote back very quickly and kind of said, yeah, you know, thank you for bringing this up. But so, you know, this being our social media age, I went on Twitter, and I'm not a huge presence on Twitter by any means, but I mostly am friends with writers there. And so I decided to express my views, and I was mostly curious to see whether other people shared them or not. And to my surprise, apparently many people for years have been harboring the same complaints about these emerging writer programs. And specifically the Brown and Wallace Award, because it's such a prominent and esteemed award. And a friend of mine, Benu Zan, who's a poet from Toronto, she had said, well, why don't you make like an open letter and I'll sign it. And I thought, okay, great. Sure, I'll make an open letter. Maybe a couple of people will sign it. And it kind of just took off. And many people signed it, and before it was public, but before we'd actually sent it directly to RBC and the Writers Trust, they just said, we'll change our minds.